These brakes are sharp.
Yeah, these are as well, man.
Yeah, those aren't.
Good morning, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are YouTube. So unfortunately the Raging Rona is still doing the rounds and there is no UK Championship drag racing this season, so we haven't actually had an opportunity to ride our 1100. So this was a great opportunity to actually borrow a completely standard bike, give it a bit of a ride and do a bit of a review on it, and then also to compare it to its grandson, the 1400. So we were fortunately able to be lent the bike by the owner who's on ZZR1400 in front, and let's see how this compares and why the ZZR is such a significant motorcycle and what the 1100's like today compared to the 14. Kawasaki really set the world on fire in 1990 with the launch of the ZZR 1100. Up till then, 1000cc bikes had run between 150 and 160 mile an hour top speed, and they came in, rewrote the rule book and put the top speed for an 1100 up at nearly 180 miles an hour. This was of course what caused Honda to react and produce the Blackbird, and of course from then in the whole generation of hyperbikes like the Blackbird and the Hayabusa was written, and off we go. But what is the ZZR 1100 actually like today? Well, the reality is it feels halfway between modern and old. I'm used to riding older bikes. I have the ZZR1400 that will occasionally pop into frame as we're riding, but it's a more straightforward, it's more powerful. Obviously it's getting towards twice the size of engine, but it still delivers in a very carbureted kind of way. The low end power isn't absolutely insane, although there is lots of it, and it builds in quite a linear fashion, and by 7,000 RPM it's very easy to be revving much harder than you think. But the chassis feels very stable, although I have noticed the low speed stability isn't absolutely perfect. Not so much that it's unstable, but at low speed it has a tendency to want to pile straight on and almost behave like it doesn't want to turn. It feels like the centre of gravity is not the lowest in the world, but isn't super high. But it does make it, on a road like this, quite an easy bike. It's not difficult to control the throttle at low RPM, because it isn't mountains of torque down there. But it's never going to be sharp. We're at 2,500 now, and I could pull happily with only a tweak of the throttle. You do that on a 600 and absolutely nothing's going to happen. But one of the things I noticed with this bike, the riding position's very, very natural. It's not too far canted forward, and the wind speed very rapidly matches the lean on your wrists, and it's actually easier to ride if you just don't overthink it. The brakes aren't the sharpest. There are some upgrades, and apparently some versions of GSX-1000 calipers can fit with minor mods, but I can't recommend that because I don't know enough about the conversion. And you are aware this is quite a big heavy bike, but it never becomes a real problem. One of the things I have noticed on this bike, it likes a lot of counter steer. It doesn't want you to ride it like a 600. You do have to really give the inner bar a shove, and then the lower speed handling does come good. But it doesn't like it if you do something silly like brake into a corner too deep, as I did a little bit there. It just doesn't want to turn. So you do have to ride it in a very controlled fashion, accelerate and brake, do the braking in a straight line, turn in at a low speed, give it a good bit of counter steer, and then drive the bike out the other side. Ride it like that and it's very, very happy. It's easy to see why this was a bike that got a reputation as a license loser. It's very, very easy to give it a rev out, look down and find yourself doing 90 or 100 miles an hour. Because it builds power in a nice linear way, there's no sudden step in the power delivery, it just wants to sit up and go. So what I'm going to do now is just put a few miles on. We're going to just keep out to a local spot. Now the rider in front owns this bike, so he's going to have ridden both as well. I've already ridden the 1400, sorry. We'll have a bit of a chat and a discuss and see what each person thinks and how different and similar the bikes are. But yeah, so let's go and put some miles on it. Remember it's left here, yeah. Yeah, you clip. That's it, yeah. Yeah, never be under any illusion for its age. It is a powerful bike. The biggest difference isn't when you're revving; it's actually the bottom end. In some ways, its engine is easy to ride, significantly easy to ride, because it's got much less low-end power. Like massive difference. Yeah, your wave of torque that almost makes the bike accelerate on its own at about 3,000, that just doesn't happen on this. Oh yeah, it was 60 or 70 horsepower difference, and only 20 kilos difference, so it is a big change. Yes, that's it in front. Snooty Tavern. Snooty Fox Tavern. Yeah.
But yeah, no. So I noticed with the 11, so you've got to brake into the corner, to the corner, off the brakes, let it recover, get it to composure, really heavily counter steer it, and then drive it through and out. If you're trying to do anything else, it doesn't want to know. Whereas the 1400 will let you do how you want to do. If you want to trail into slightly, it can. It just feels more, I suppose, precise. I don't know if it's a stiffer frame or whether it's just more modern forks. I think it might be the forks that are different.
Yeah, I mean it's a newer bike, but yeah, it just everything just feels tighter, and it's far more forgiving. You can get away with a lot more. Go into corners a little bit faster.
But the engine's not, though, because I found the torque, because it's so torquey at no RPM, the engine's not. If you hit a bump, you twitch on the 14 at low speed, it's wanting to go.
Yeah.
Whereas the 11, because it's not got quite that bottom end on it, is a lot more friendly. So it's almost like the engine is almost too much in the 1400, and you're going to be better off with almost a little. You always want to put a bit of torque out of it in the first couple of gears. Because I think it'd be, especially on a slippery surface, because it's got no traction control. Yeah. I think if you're on a damp road and you sneeze at the wrong point, you could spin the back tyre up without even thinking. Where the 11's not quite got that razor edge.
No.
But the 11 builds more linear, and by 5,000 or 6,000 you crack the throttle open on the 11, and it's still got all the power in the world. Yeah. There's no shortage of power in it.
No, neither of them are short of power. I think
not in the slightest.
As you get up towards that mid-range, both of them just take off. I mean, I always describe the 1100 as a supersonic missile, and the 14 is just a hypersonic.
It kind of feels like a black hole in front of you pulling you forward, doesn't it? Yeah, it's quite
because it
remarkable.
Just picks up straight away. You said all that low down torque. It just catapults you forward, and it just keeps doing it all the way through. Whereas you get the gentle start up on the 1100 before then you get a kick in the backside.
Yeah, if you twitched over a bump, it's not going to spit you off in the same way. I mean, the 1100 still demands respect. I mean, there's a lot of horsepower in that. A lot of horsepower in the 1100. It still demands respect. But the 14 is almost too much, and it makes you wonder where a manufacturer's going to go from here. Because there's no point putting more power in, because it's always, I mean, the 14 is like, oh, that's too fast, oh, that's too fast. And as traffic conditions getting slower, I can see why that whole genre of bike becoming more and more irrelevant, and why the retro style and adventure bikes are becoming more and more popular.
Yeah.
Because they've reached the point of peak sports bike, but that 1400 is almost too powerful for the road.
And they're both incredible bikes. They'll do anything bar go off road.
Yeah.
And again, you can see why adventure sports bikes, if you've only got one bike, then something like an adventure sport bike will do everything.
Yeah. So I was going to say, which is the better bike, the 14 or the 12? Oh, sorry, the 11. But is the 12? I've not ridden one.
It could be the 12. We need to go and get a 12. One of us needs to get a 1200.
We need to get a 12 in there, because I think maybe the extra bit of power in the 12, the engine will be a bit more similar, but not quite as razor edge as the 14.
Yeah.
the chassis a bit more like the 14.
Yeah.
It might just be the one that's the perfect combination. But
we could have gone too far.
yeah, I think the reality is, given that the 11's getting into classic territory now, and the prices are starting to go up, a nice 11 like yours is not something you should shy away from having in the garage. It's absolutely
value for money.
a great bike.
For performance, for
Yeah.
the price you can pay for one now.
Because
it's
in
incredible value.
10 years' time, you'll probably sell it for quite a bit more than you paid for it. Whereas if you actually want to go out and do long national or even transnational and transcontinental rides, that 14 is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
To be fair though, so is the 11.
Yeah, no, well, I've
So,
done that. That's what
yeah.
I bought it for in the past. So,
But
it's
yeah,
done all those sort of
so
trips.
either really, I think it depends on which one you feel most comfortable on is the one that's really the one to do.
Yeah,
Better go and put some more miles on in there.
let's go.
So what is the ZZR1400 really like? Well, in a short word, absolutely ballistic. The way it gathers speed is just comical, and it's doing that at sort of 5,000 and 6,000 RPM, and you've got no bearings. It's really hard. You have to remind yourself just how ridiculously quick this bike is, because it's smooth and it feels a lot lighter than it really is. It is just insanely quick. We're coming out here, a little tweak of the throttle, and we're pulling our arm sockets out virtually at 4,000 RPM, and it just builds and builds and builds. So it's almost like the whole bike is just a nuclear device of an engine with a bike wrapped around it. It's all encompassing, that engine. It's just insane. I mean, we're sitting here 65 miles an hour at 3,500 RPM, which is in bike terms not even ticking over for a bike red lines at 11,000. And even at that ease speeds, overtaking is just a tiny fraction of your wrist away. Even now at 3,000, it just responds instantly from a couple of millimetres of throttle pull. The other thing that's really noticeable is one of the differences between carbureted and fuel injected bikes. There is pretty much no induction noise. The 1100, you're always quite conscious of the induction noise. It's always there. Whereas with the 1400, there's almost no noise. 1100's definitely got a bassier exhaust note, and both bikes are on standard exhaust, so it's a fair comparison. But the 14, despite its monumental horsepower, is actually very, very placid at low speeds. With the exception of going very slowly, it's almost easy to make it twitch, because a tiny twitch to the throttle results, I mean, that was a millimetre of throttle movement and it goes straight away. So it is absolutely essential that you are an experienced rider when riding this bike. If you've only been riding for a few months and you've only got experience with a small bike, work your way up to these. There's no shame in taking it easy and building up, because this is a bike a novice will get into trouble on very quickly. Riding position feels a little bit wider, but still very comfortable, but it feels lower. It definitely feels lower at the front end in particular. Not in an uncomfortable way, it just feels like the whole bike's closer to the ground. The other thing that's been really impressive is the fuel economy. I mean, this is averaging 41 mpg, and at the moment we're doing, you know, probably a bit more than that, because it's averaging 41. And this is something that's significantly in excess of supercar performance, and yet it's doing 40 miles per gallon because it's a bike. So if you want to go fast on a budget, oh, this is just monumental. I mean, I couldn't imagine on the road would ever get us to full throttle in any serious way without risking your license. But the torque is just mind-blowing on it, but the chassis is super sorted too. It does make you wonder though, this particular example has got just coming up for 10,000 miles on the clock. It's a one owner from new, well, now two owner from new bike, and this changed hands for just £5,000. So it does make you wonder, actually, is its real truest competitor a brand new ZZR 1400, and why would you? It's very hard to see any situation where you are ever going to need more bike than this. the chassis is lovely, the chassis is great, the riding position's very nice, the seat's comfortable, the brakes are progressive with ABS, and generally everything is modern. Everything feels modern. I mean, this bike's a late 2009 model, so it is 10.5 years old, but it feels like it's just rolled out of the showroom. And it's, hyperbole is often one of those things people always say, oh, it feels like a brand new machine, but this really does. And having owned bikes from you as well, this absolutely feels like a brand new bike. So it's fitting that you see quite often that these are often for sale with 50, 60 or 70,000 miles on them, because they can do that quite easily. But yeah, it's really a remarkable piece of kit. So, are there any downsides? Now, what we were saying, how would I assess the situation with these two bikes? If anything, the 14 is ever so slightly clinical, because it is so composed, because it is so capable. You're never working, and it can, for that reason, be a little frustrating because it is always straightening at the leash. I mean, the thought of being able to get this to the red line in each gear anywhere outside of a drag strip or a track day on the road is, you're just not going to be able to. The motor is super smooth, the riding position's nice, as we said before, the handling is very easy. Yeah, it's a bike you can rapidly cover ground on. So, which would I choose? In some ways, possibly the 1100. I think the danger with the 1400 is because it is so good, because it is so powerful and so smooth, you're going to get used to it and find yourself in license losing territories routinely, and the worry is that sooner or later that's going to catch up with you. But it is just an absolute monster. I mean, with a little straight here, we're doing, you know, near the legal limit here, and instantly, I mean, I'm having to hold on to this ground-based missile as it just gains speed at a monumental rate. And with a couple of tweaks at the throttle, we're into speeds that are not sensible. And that's without trying. So if you get someone who is prone to silly behaviour on one of these, their licence is going to expire very quickly. So you need to be a restrained rider. So what is this bike for, to sum up? Well, this is a mile muncher. This is the sort of bike you can ride to the south of France and actually enjoy doing so. This is going to cover ground very easily and quickly at speed, and its smoothness means it's not fatiguing to ride, and it really disguises the fact that we're talking of a 200 horsepower, near 200 mile an hour bike, and that's only due to restrictions and agreements that it's limited to 186. I mean, without a restrictor on it, it could conceivably do 200 miles an hour. So it's never actually in its zone. It's never quite, it always wants to go faster than you could possibly go. And I think the danger is you would eventually give in to its demands and start going silly. So a great piece of kit, astonishingly well engineered. And it's very hard to see how either of these bikes is a bad choice. Realistically, it's going to come down to which one you feel more comfortable sat on. I would say in some circumstances the 1100 is a little easier to ride at low speed, just purely because it's not quite got that knife edge torque at 3,000 and 4,000 RPM, but then the 1400, understandably being a more modern bike, has the more competent newer chassis. So either bike's a great choice. I would say it's just purely down to which one you're going to prefer. I'd love to try one of the CBR 1000s, not the Fireblade, the 1000F, to see how that sits by comparison to the ZZR 1100. But either of these bikes is an incredible piece of equipment and pretty much just land-based missiles. If you like these videos, hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you soon in another video.